That's on.
Is
We're
that
ready.
on?
Yes. Whenever you're ready.
Okay.
Go.
All right, call this meeting to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God,
indivisible, liberty and justice for all. All right, first, our next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. So our meeting on March 18th, we discussed Transco LLC. We went through all different parts of the project. All right, and then we set the public hearing that will take place this evening. Then we have a resolution authorizing the release of a planning board escrow. And then we went into a executive session that was a attorney-client privilege, and came out of that, and then adjourned the meeting. Okay, so approval of minutes, motion made by
So moved.
Member Palmer, seconded by Member Villano. Discussion. Seeing no discussion, all those in favor of approving the minutes say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed say no. Okay, that motion passes 6-0 with one absence. Okay, next we have discussion and public hearing on NY Transco LLC. All right, so we're going to go through some things just to make sure everyone in the room knows what we are talking about this evening. That'll be myself, that'll be our consultants. Then we will allow the applicant to make a statement, and then we will open the public hearing. We'll say for the record what letters we've received as part of the public hearing that were in before the deadline at 2 p.m. And then we'll go off the list. The list is over there, correct? For the sign in for the public hearing. So if you'd like to speak at the public hearing, please do sign in on the list. We don't need that yet. You could just, there might be more people who want to sign in. So thank you. Okay. So let me go back to Marilyn, I lost it again. Where is it? Just tell me where it is. Documents?
It was on the desktop.
It's on the desktop?
What you looking for?
The folder for the meeting. Thank you.
And there's a folder in there that says today, right?
Thank you. All right, so just to start things off, I'm again going to go through what was discussed months ago and then at the last meeting with respect to what this process is about. Transco is on the agenda tonight in accordance with the directive in the court's decision, which stated that the matter is remanded to the Town of Dover Planning Board for it to take a quote hard look at areas of environmental concern, as more particularly discussed herein, and after so doing, reconsidering whether to issue a positive or negative declaration on the Transco project. The quote-unquote hard look at contamination includes but is not limited to the following impacts. Number 3, impacts on surface water from contamination. Number 4, impacts to groundwater from contamination. Number 7, impacts on plants and animals from contamination. Number 12, impacts on critical environmental areas such as the Great Swamp from contamination. And number 16, impacts on human health from contamination. In taking the hard look, the court further directed that we consider Mr. Sullivan and Dr. Botchelder's letters to the planning board, which we did and we will do again. And so all right, this is a letter from Dr. Botchelder from last year. And so to our consultants, is there anything from this letter that we have not considered?
I think we covered everything so far with our second look at the contamination issue.
Okay.
This board has reviewed the scope of work that AKRF developed in response to the court's decision. The town retained a third-party consultant, Scott Taylor, to help review AKRF's work. Just a reminder for the public that AKRF was not hired by the applicant to do the Phase 2. We were working under the contract with the town, and we get paid out of the escrow from the applicant, but they were not hiring us directly to do this work.
Okay. And then for the,
Can we just go back to
Sure.
to that letter?
yep,
So she was recommending at least 15 to 20 soil borings specifically located where junkyard activities and storage of junk had occurred.
right.
So could we just have Scott and Brian talk about the scope of work and how that fits?
Original scope of work had, after completing a site walk, where we first looked at the historical documents and then walked the site to look at access and available locations where we could complete test pits. We initially selected 15 locations. In the process of going out and completing those test pits, 2 more locations were added for 17 total. As far as including the installation of monitoring wells, areas where groundwater existed above bedrock and within the overburden, so a zone of saturation that could be sampled, only existed at 2 locations. For the most part, bedrock refusal was encountered before a water table was encountered. And so at those 2 locations, there were existing wells, and those wells were sampled.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Taylor, in your role as peer reviewing AKRF's work, is there anything you'd like to add to that? Or?
No, other than it was a comprehensive look at all areas that were previously contained automobile or scrapping operations. And as Brian said, the only 2 areas that had viable groundwater were in the areas that currently had monitoring wells.
Okay.
Could you just remind me, how did you decide which areas previously had the junkyard and automobiles on them?
So we reviewed the Phase 1, and, we can see from the historic aerial photos that there were automobile storage, and that's where we focused all of our test pits, because that would be the most likely areas that would contain contaminants from those automobiles.
Okay. All right. Anything further on the Dr. Botchelder letter? Any members of the planning board have any comments, questions? Okay. All right, and then this was the letter from Mr. Sullivan. Okay, so he talks about the TRC letter titled Environmental Conditions Proposed Dover Station, dated July 28, 2022. And then goes on about what they did and what it says they found. And so then review of the TRC letter reveals several critical omissions, according to Mr. Sullivan. One, no actual concentration values for detected chemicals. Sampling locations may be too few to be representative. Limited analysis of groundwater sample MW1. And then goes on to talk about GPR, ground penetrating radar. No description of the area surveyed with GPR. No discussion of potential survey limitations. No indication that other anomalies were detected. And then he has recommended actions. So, okay. So again, like the previous letter, if we can have our consultants speak to. Sure. Paul, if you want to maybe lead the questioning there.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so let's, I mean, I think AKRF and Scott have already spoken about their qualifications, so we don't need to discuss that. but
Right.
go-
And I
let's
think
go
we've
back
already
up.
gone over the sampling locations, maybe too few to be representative, another 17, and you already discussed the groundwater sample, correct? Okay.
Right. So when I read this letter, I guess the first question is, he talks about carcinogens and a number of metals.
The part,
There we go.
yeah.
The heavy metals. So he said that the presence of these in the last test were concerning. So can you explain if you tested for them and what the results were?
Yes. The metals that are listed here, including aluminum, lead, mercury, arsenic, cadmium, chromium, these metals, they're all naturally occurring. The inorganics that come from the ground, we mine them, synthesize them for our use. They are naturally occurring, so when we look at results for metals analysis, we'll keep that in mind. The New York State Department of Health produced a rural background concentration report where they collected samples all across the state and established the range of concentrations for each one of those metals that they consider to be naturally occurring.
Okay.
We also look at the prevailing regulations, specifically the soil cleanup objectives that are established by New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. These are the soil cleanup objectives that are used for their environmental remediation programs. So if you have a release of contamination on your site and that release of contamination falls under a certain regulatory enforcement, the state can require you, whether it's through the State Hazardous Waste Act Superfund or through a violation of, say, a drinking water rule or some other mechanism where they could use a legal consent order. Those are the established regulations and criteria of what you have to meet. Those same regulations and criteria also are applied if you're going to voluntarily clean up the site. Say you want to enter the brownfield cleanup program. In all these scenarios where the state oversees and sets the standard, those SCOs are what they use for that standard. And that covers volatiles, semi-volatile organics, PCBs, pesticides, and metals.
Okay.
And so for every one of our test pit samples, we analyzed for every one of the metals that are included on the Part 375 regulations. To have a metal and to understand what it means, or to have any detection of any compound and understand what it means, you want to compare it to an established cleanup criteria. The cleanup criteria, the soil cleanup objective that we used for this site was, we used the residential criteria for human exposure. We also used the protection of groundwater criteria for, if a contaminant mobilizes and it's above a concentration that exceeds a protection of groundwater, then the state considers that concentration to be a potential danger. It's a potential to contaminate groundwater from your release area as it migrates to water. So we completed the investigation, and we used all of the established requirements for sample collection, laboratory-provided glassware, we're licensed by the state to do this work. People that conducted the work were under the direct oversight of a professional geologist or professional engineer. We collected the appropriate quality assurance, quality control samples, used the proper preservation techniques established by the laboratory, and then used, obviously, an ELAB certified. It's the DOH's certification requirement for conducting laboratory analysis in the state. And then with those results, we compared them to, as I mentioned, the residential criteria and the protection of groundwater criteria. And I believe we were below those criteria for almost all the samples. There were a couple samples where we had some cadmium and copper that were detected that were above the residential standard. Now, if we look at like the state's soil cleanup objective for metals and unrestricted use, those concentrations, those cleanup criteria, several of them are below what's naturally occurring. So in the case of inorganics or metals, you want to take multiple lines of evidence into account. And so for the cadmium, we were in that range of naturally occurring metals, and so there wasn't, say, a red flag to indicate like this is a real outlier.
Right.
And then for copper, we're a little above it. So just as a part of normal due diligence, what we did was took the sample that had the highest concentration of those two metals, and we had it analyzed for a leachable analysis. It's called synthetic precipitation leaching procedure, and with that you can understand the ability for it to mobilize.
Nuclear mobilize means move, go somewhere else.
Correct.
Yeah.
And those results came back to tell us that the detected concentrations of those two specific metals, which were the two that we were highlighting, it was the two that were above that residential criteria. The results indicated that they were not consistent with the release of contamination.
Okay.
And that their mobilization potential was not considered to be one that would affect groundwater.
Right.
Can you just explain for non-geologists how you can tell if something is consistent with a release or not consistent with a release?
There are certain things, like if you look at DEC's definitions of grossly contaminated soil. I use something maybe people can relate to is you have an oil tank and it leaks. You have contaminants that are detected above a soil cleanup objective, You have observable evidence of contamination with staining, odors, and you can see, if you excavate a test pit, sometimes you can even see the mobilization path, how it went through the ground. But definitely the quantified analysis of a sample, which shows that it exceeds a soil cleanup objective.
Right.
Then you would indicate that, yeah, we have evidence and documentation here that would support a conclusion that there's been a release to the environment.
Okay.
Another way is to look at the spill reporting requirements for the state. They'll list out very specific things. You meet one of those items, you're legally required to call in a spill. But say you have a hazardous waste compound on your site. It's in soil that's out in the yard. It was detected at 5 feet below grade, and it's above this certain criteria.
In the SCO.
Yeah, and the concentration hits a certain level. That's when the state can turn around and say, we have the legal authority to tell you, you have to do something about that and enforce this.
And none of that was found?
No.
Okay.
So,
And you keep referencing the residential SEO, which would be used if this was going to be maybe a subdivision with kids playing in a playground, and
Yes.
this is a commercial site, and there's a standard that is for commercial properties, right?
Correct. Yeah, we chose to go with a more stringent standard than the proposed use.
Right. We went with this more stringent standard. And,
So the residential and
Thank you.
protection of groundwater SCOs are the current regulatory clean standard. So if you get analysis that are fall below the residential and protection of groundwater, that soil is deemed clean
Right.
and usable in any project.
right. And there were two samples, they each had,
The two metals,
Something, right.
and we found that, they were, although above the residential, they were not likely mobile in the environment.
right, based on the leachate test.
Right, correct.
And with this project, I mean, maybe this is more for like Engineer Berger, having reviewed it, much of this soil is being removed to go off-site?
Correct.
Okay. So, even if there was an issue,
It would
It'll
go
be-
with the soil.
go with the soil and be someone else's issue?
Well, it would go, to wherever the.
Yeah, wherever it's going,
It
not
would go to
here.
a proper place.
to-
Yes, not wherever, right.
Properly-
Wherever it properly is going, of course.
Close up and document it.
Right.
So it wouldn't
And,
just go to someone's backyard.
Standard process is to characterize the soil. So you get a long list of required laboratory analysis based on the licensed and certified receiving facility. And then you would go through a process of, it's kind of like a cradle-to-grave process, where you have a manifest of when it gets loaded onto the truck, and then that manifest is signed when it goes to the facility.
Right. I guess my only point there was, there's no facility in Dover, it's going to go the proper way out of town.
There's no place in Dover for it to stay.
Thank you. All right.
I just want them to
Attorney
address one of the comments in the Sullivan letter, was the fact that specific contaminants like Biz-2 ethylexyl phthalate were found in the soils of the proposed substation and in downgradient surface waters on the adjacent Frogs parcel suggests that contaminants are migrating from the site. So, can you address that statement, comment?
Sure. First of all, to wrap up metals.
Yeah.
Last. I talked about how we had those two compounds in the one sample that
Right.
exceeded the residential standard, but they were below the protection of groundwater standard. Even though they were below that standard, we still did the SPLP just as a second line of evidence to confirm it's,
And again, to go above and beyond.
tried to.
Right.
And then so for The next question, we're obviously we're hired to, look at this site and its historic uses and to determine whether those uses have resulted in a release of contamination to the environment. And so to do that, we look at all available reports from licensed and certified professionals. And we basically use what the state of New York enforces upon us as the standard. They have a lot of, pretty smart people that have gone through the process to promulgate these regulations, looking at protection of human health and also protection of groundwater. And so we developed a scope of work to, confirm our goals here. Was a historical action responsible for a release of contaminants to the environment? And so, if I look at what my company's doing right now, we have approximately 20 projects that are either, state Superfund, brownfield cleanup program, consent order site, where the state is telling us what we have to do, and they are setting the gold standard. And for each one of these sites, that standard is the soil cleanup objectives. It's a nice comprehensive list of everything from volatiles to semi-volatiles, PCBs, pesticides, and metals. And that's the list we went with.
Right.
That's what they
And
enforce.
the work you
on
did
us.
for us is work you do and your people do all the time.
Correct, yeah.
Okay. And Mr. Taylor, you review these
Correct.
all the time. Thank you.
So, no, that's not to say that you wouldn't look at another compound. But if I looked at bis-2-X-oxalate or aluminum, they were detected, the bis-2-X-oxalate was detected during one of the initial soil investigations. With the highest concentration, I think it was like 3.5 ppm. Now, there's no soil cleanup objective based on the baseline soil cleanup objectives for that.
Okay.
CP51, it's another, it's a state regulation that it talks about how the state comes up with soil cleanup objectives and sets forth soil cleanup levels that are, selected for the different DEC remedial programs. Their residential criteria for bis-2-X-oxalate is 50. So with our highest concentration being 3.4 and the state's regulation being 50, which is a whole order of magnitude higher, and when it was far below the protection of groundwater, which I believe is 435 ppm.
Okay.
So looking at our comprehensive list of soil cleanup objectives, and then looking at the historical data, that list seemed to be sufficient for this investigation.
Okay. Thank you.
And then I can also comment on the aluminum,
Sure.
which was there is no soil cleanup objective for public health and protection of groundwater for aluminum. And when you look at that rural soil background concentration, your 25th percentile is like 5,000 ppm, and it goes up to 20,000 ppm for your range of it's a very comprehensive naturally occurring metal.
Right.
And so the established concentrations on site were right around 5,000. We were in that low end of the naturally occurring.
Okay.
So it also wasn't a red flag that would say,
Right. And I believe maybe it was Mr. Taylor who said it would be strange if you didn't find aluminum. Right?
Correct.
Yeah, I think you said that maybe at one of our previous meetings.
Yes.
Of course, you found aluminum.
Soil has
Why
a
wouldn't
gray,
you
if
find-
soil has a gray hue, it's aluminum silicate. So, lots of people have gray soil in their backyard.
Right. Okay. All right. Anything further you wanted to add?
um,
Ryan, before he goes on, still not talking into the microphones.
Okay.
oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so you can just pull the microphone closer.
I'll get it close.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor, too. Thank you. Anything further you wanted to add?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Taylor, anything else you wanted to add?
No, sir.
Okay.
No, sir.
Barry Polidoro, anything further on this letter as you see it?
Well, just on item 3, Mr. Sullivan was requesting that DEC issue a letter, or that there be a consultation with DEC on the appropriate SEOs and contaminants.
Right, so let me go to that. So we did reach out to the DEC, and also Mr. Sullivan also reached out to the DEC. And so we did get a response from the DEC. And I think I'll wait till we actually open the public hearing for me to read that response.
I mean, it's part of the record.
Okay.
You can-
So, dear Planning Board Chairman Ryan Cortine, I write in response to your January 12th, 2024 letter received on January 17, 2024 on behalf of the Town of Dover Planning Board regarding the NY Transco project reference above. Provided with your letter was a scope of work prepared by AKRF dated January 3, 2024 for a subsurface investigation at the project site. In your letter, you requested advice and input from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, or DEC, regarding the Planning Board's environmental review of the project pursuant to an August 2023 decision and order in Friends of the Great Swamp, Putnam and Dutchess Counties, Inc. et al. v. Town of Dover, NY et al. Index number 2023-50796. DEC is not a party to this litigation. Your letter indicated the Planning Board was seeking DEC's feedback on the proposed scope of work for soil testing at the project site. The Planning Board also requested guidance from DEC as to the appropriate soil cleanup objectives, SEOs, to analyze any contaminants found as a result of the soil testing. On March 18, 2024, DEC staff were informed that the Planning Board had proceeded with the subsurface investigation and field activities were completed from January 30, 2024 through February 2, 2024. They were informed because we hadn't heard from them and we really wanted to get the response. DEC soil cleanup objectives, or SEOs, at 6 NYCRR subpart 375-6 are used when a site is part of a remedial program administered by DEC, such as the Brownfield Cleanup Program or State Superfund Program. See 6 NYCRR 375-6.1, Environmental Conservation Law 27-1415, subsection 6. See also Commissioner's Policy 51, Soil Cleanup Guidance, available at that web address. This property is not part of a DEC remedial program referenced above, and therefore the SEOs do not apply. Based on the information provided, DEC does not have jurisdiction to require the application of any particular SEOs at this time. DEC has no other comments. Please let me know if you have any questions. That was Kelly Turturro, the regional director. So that's what we got from the DEC. Anything further? Attorney Polidoro?
No.
That? Okay. Close that. Anything further with the original Sullivan letter? This was a follow-up. All right. I guess I can just go through it now that we did receive other letters from members of the public Andrea Zamir, Andrea Birdquist Zamir, sent in a letter. We'll get back to the Oblong Land Conservancy one in a moment. Lisa Cohambin submitted a letter. This is that same letter from before. Jill Fieldstein submitted a letter. This was a letter from the DEC. And this was the Frog's letter again. Let's see. Functions. Okay. So the okay. Wanted to address something that I read in the Oblong Land Conservancy letter. One of the basic points here, as I'm reading, is that they seem to believe that we are just relying again on the applicant's information. Is that how you read it, Planner Warner?
Correct, yeah.
And so I think we've made it very clear that we've done our own investigation. And I guess just want to make a point on this now. I don't know, all of you work in different municipalities, doing different work. What percent of the applications you've worked with would the planning board hire whomever to do this sort of work? Obviously, you do this work a lot, but how often is it that a planning board or a town board, some entity of local government is hiring to do this work?
It's not always. I mean, our primary role in the municipal planning practice that we have is to review the applicant's submissions.
Right.
And a technical review of that with our experts in-house.
Okay.
So this was an atypical type of arrangement.
I guess let me ask you a different way. What percentage of applications do you rely on the applicant's data?
95%.
85%? Okay. Attorney Polidoro, you've done stuff in a lot of communities?
Yeah, sure. For the most part, the planning board takes on a peer review role of the applicant studies.
Right.
Only in an extraordinary case would the
Such as
planning
this.
board, such as this, would the planning board undertake its own study of the applicant's information or project.
All right. So again, we did that. So this letter, obviously, planning board members, you have this in your email. You're welcome to, obviously, I need to read those. And people are obviously here to give their own comments this evening. I don't have anything further at this time. Any members of the planning board have any comments or questions at this time? Attorney Polidoro, anything needs to be added? No. Planner Werner?
No.
Gentlemen?
No. No.
Engineer Berger? No. Okay, thank you. All right. With that, as always, for every applicant, we give the applicant an option to speak. It is their application. Sir, if you'd like to speak now, and then we're going to open the public hearing.
I'll be very brief. Just want to thank the chairman and the members of the board for the opportunity to be here to again discuss the Dover Station project. For those of you that don't remember, my name is Sam Johnson, and I'm a senior project manager at New York Transco. New York Transco and its consultants have reviewed the AKRF report and the further comments from Taylor Environmental. We are in full agreement that the general characteristics of the proposed Dover Station site conclude that there is no contamination and therefore no chance of any contamination migrating off-site during the construction process. Per the recommendation of the report, we are also creating an excavation management plan and will submit it as a condition of any potential future approvals of the planning board. We are looking forward to continuing the planning board process and listening to the meaningful comments from the interested parties here today. I thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so again, anyone who'd like to speak at this public hearing, there's a sign-up sheet there. But as we always do, if you'd like to speak after we exhaust the list, you are welcome to come to the podium, so. Anybody still looking to sign up, please do so now. What? Yeah, I haven't made a motion yet. All right. So, I see someone signing up. That's good. Let me just see what. While we're waiting for that, let me just again reiterate from the previous meeting the rest of this letter. What I wrote back last year and then again read last meeting. So I got up to the part with Mr. Sullivan and Dr. Botchelder. So next, the applicant has submitted additional information for the board's consideration, including a draft scope of work for additional testing. We already went through all that. Although unusual and regular course of the planning board review, the planning board intends to have its own consultant, AKRF, which we did, finalize the scope of work and perform testing. In addition, the planning board will consider hiring a third party to advise on the scope of work and a peer review AKRF's report, and that's Mr. Taylor. The court confirmed that the planning board has taken a hard look at all other potential environmental impacts, as well as concerns regarding environmental justice and habitat issues. The planning board will not be reconsidering those concerns. At the appropriate time during the process, the planning board will have a public hearing regarding only the matters before the board, and that is where we are right now. Okay. All right, so I'll need a motion to open the public hearing for NY Transco LLC Electrical Substation.
So moved.
Motion made by member Lorobadir,
Second.
seconded by, you guys fight it out. Okay, member Palmer. Okay. Any discussion before opening this public hearing? Okay, seeing no discussion, all those in favor of opening the public hearing say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say no. Okay, this public hearing is now open for NY Transco LLC Electrical Substation. We have 5 people here listed who would like to speak. So again, for the public hearings, please, when I say your name, please come to the podium, and you have 3 minutes. So first we have Frank Mancuso.
Frank Mancuso from Millbrook. The courts have ruled that this board has not taken a hard look at the concerns of the community. Substations kill thousands of people. I now have some new concerns. Why were trucks of soil removed? Was there a chain of custody with those trucks? Con Edison is notorious for dumping toxins in this area. Case in point, I had a Superfund site property that had PCBs and dioxins on it, and as the gentleman said, they had all the requirements. It was supposed to be washed and go in Virginia in my case and be incinerated, and the trucks came to the Dover area and dumped their toxins. It's possible some of them may even be on that site. Will you provide a map of the results and the test sampling, especially the depth of the sampling, and did they test for PCBs and dioxins? Those are my new concerns.
Okay, thank you. So, we're going to answer anything now? We do have a map.
Do you want to respond?
Yeah, Brian can take most of this, but our phase 2 report that was posted had a map of the 17 test pit locations, all the backup tables that we summarized, plus the lab data behind it. But as far as
That's been available on the town's website for some time now.
correct. As far as the PCBs and dioxins, you want to?
Yeah, the SCOs, which were mentioned in that letter, that don't apply, we still use them, and we use the most stringent one just to make sure we are covering our basis.
Be clear, the most stringent one being the most reasonably stringent one, the residential one.
Right, of the restricted uses. And also protection of groundwater. But of that, we included every compound that was in the SCOs, which included volatile organic compounds, semi-volatile organic compounds, PCBs, pesticides, one herbicide, and metals.
Okay.
And so we tested for that full list.
Thank you. All right, next we have Jennifer Lazaro. Please come to the podium, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Good evening, I'm Jennifer Lazaro. Dear members of the board, the past 2 years have been quite a learning experience as we neighbors joined together to educate ourselves about the history of our town in hopes to plan for a better future. Specific to this site, I've read countless pages of Dover Town meeting minutes from decades ago and spoken with locals about the various projects or businesses which took place on and around the Transco proposed location. What all of these stories and documented minutes have in common is that there were many red flags and causes for concern with some of the ill and unmonitored activities which took place and the lack of the proper remediation to follow. There were even times when the DEC stepped in and described the contamination on the former town dump located adjacent to the property where Transco will connect to the towers on the northern side of Cricket Hill, which put that parcel on the map as a Superfund. This part of the Transco project is never even discussed, but the DEC does have a lot of documentation on that land if you request it from them. The former junkyard was constantly a topic of discussion during town meetings, but the amount of information contained in those minutes and for the span of time with which it was discussed is far too much information to get into tonight. Learning from our neighbors who have resided here during the years of the junkyard and poorly managed town dump controversy has raised many concerns for those of us who live here now. I'm as far as one can be from an expert on the testing with which would be deemed adequate to determine if this parcel on the table tonight was adequately tested, but from other locals who are experts and from those who have made it their purpose to protect areas such as the Great Swamp and rare and endangered species, I question whether the testing complete on this site was thorough and adequate enough, especially after learning that certain contaminants found in previous samples was not included in the current samples. I'm not questioning the ability of the specialist, but more so the thoroughness of the type of deep investigation with which this situation warrants. These experts are responsible for protecting this irreplaceable natural resource and hold the safety and health of our residents in their hands. When they are long gone, we will still be here, and I want them to be aware of the specific history of the land in which they just tested. I'm curious if they were provided with a detailed history which can be found by sifting through decades of town minutes to see what was happening during and after the years this property had activity taking place on it. I have not read through the entire 50-plus years of notes, but from the year I left off and until I moved here in 2001, it does not look like I skipped over any thorough remediation process, as it still looked like a junkyard in 2001. The only time it appears that this waste was removed, from the site was during the clear cutting of the trees by Transco, when debris was pushed around and at minimum tires were hauled away. It is unfathomable to really believe that any and all contamination simply vanished from the site by simply sitting untouched for longer than many of us have been alive. My other point of concern has to do with the amount of land disturbance that occurred in the parking lot area of the Transco site in the past year of time. Was any testing completed before, during, or after the removal and addition of truckloads of material? Also, was the material hauled away tested for contaminants, and do the recipients of the material know the origin? The judge presiding over this case clearly articulated that there was a planning board decision made without adequate knowledge to make that decision, and with this gift our community received of a second chance by our leaders, we need to be steadfast and cross every T in an effort to prevent irreversible damage to one of the gems of not only our community but our planet. For transparency and peace of mind, it would have been helpful if the planning board accepted the offer from Frogs to accompany the hired specialist during the testing process, and perhaps would not have so many questions, concerns, or distrust in the process. I'm going to skip right to the end. Tonight, I request that you continue this investigation into the Transco proposed site, listen to your neighbors and the judge's decision, and take the advice from our very own experts with these actions. One, extend the public hearing so our residents can have comfort in knowing a decision will not be made in haste. And two, more testing, investigating to be done with ample time for our residents to access, interpret the findings, and for our board to make an educated decision. Thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Lazaro, if you'd like to submit the entire letter to the secretary, that's certainly acceptable.
Chairman Courtney, could you ask them to not clap because my hearing aids is
Okay.
killing me? Thank you.
Sure, yes. The clapping is hurting the ears of our secretary. If you could please not do that. Thank you. Mary Polidoro or Planner Warner, is there anything you wanted to address there?
I mean, just that we can go through, but earlier, the applicants were stating that they did based the locations of the soil tests on the history of the site as a junkyard. It helped in choosing them.
Right, and then we did as well.
Yeah, I'll just add that there was a Phase 1 ESA that was done to the standard that the applicant had submitted, and their consultant prepared a scope of work to address those recognized environmental conditions, the history of the site and surroundings, and we used the same report to develop our scope. And it does look at, aerial photograph history. It looks at regulatory database searches going back several years for the site and adjacent properties. So, the recognized conditions on the site were that it was an automobile storage facility, and then I'm sure it did identify the adjacent sites and what the uses were there. But again, we investigated nearly the entire site, 17 locations, with test pits, excavating a test pit rather than a soil probe, which is not as comprehensive. But if Brian wants to take anything else from that.
You did, that was a good attempt.
Yeah, you're okay to say.
Yeah. Well, I can just maybe elaborate on the process and how sufficient it is. As Aaron mentioned, the previous work included a Phase 1 ESA, environmental site assessment. That's the Phase 1, meaning the first step in environmental due diligence. And it follows an ASTM standard called All Appropriate Inquiries. And it's set up to look at all of the data that would be related to activities and a potential release of contamination where you can identify areas of concern. And that includes an environmental database review, so you plug in your site address and it'll spit out any data that's on file for every environmental database that is within the ASTM requirement, which includes RECRA, CERCLA, EPA, and that's on the federal level. It goes down to the state level with spills, remediation programs, violations, down to the very local where the ASTM process includes foiling or using the Freedom of Information Law to get data from the town hall. And so the environmental consultants that completed this, as with my firm, were licensed to do the work. You have to show professional good standing. You have to be a qualified environmental professional, which means you've reached a certain amount of experience to achieve that level. And there are certification processes where it's your name on the line. And so after identifying areas of concern, and the use of a scrapyard was one big one, they completed the investigation work. And then on top of that, we came in to complete additional investigation work. And when we look at, is an investigation sufficient? A great way is to look at the fact that if you were in a remediation program, so that letter earlier from the state that indicated that the site was not in a program, so the state's process doesn't apply to it. But if it was, you would be required to conduct your investigation in accordance with DEC DER 10, so that's the Department of Environmental Remediation, Article 10. It's their requirements for how you have to set up and conduct your investigation, the minimum requirements. And then there's also the Part 375. These are the, how to select a soil cleanup objective for your site, and then go about, coming up with your plan to address a release area once you have one. And so even though these don't apply legally and specifically to the site, it's a great fallback because you can use that to lay out your investigation, knowing that all of the work from the Department of Health and the chemists and the experts that determined, what a minimum sufficient investigation is, and what are the things you should test for, and that's how we formulated our plan. We did it to meet that.
Thank you.
That's it.
All right, thank you. All right, next we have Charlie Quimby. Please come to the podium, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Good evening, Charlie Quimby, on behalf of concerned citizens of Dover. We caution this board to not act too swiftly again, and to consider the full breadth of the court's decision and what is said here this evening. In this continued and court-mandated review, we see concerning similarities to the first round. In what appears to be a fast-track review, the applicant has almost a standing place on the agenda. Whether there's an update or not, they are on. At the last meeting on February 8th, there was mention of a negative declaration in 2 separate instances, once by AKRF and the other by Attorney Polidoro. All while you were still waiting on lab results from metals, a response from DEC, and comments from the public. What is the rush, the urgency, and why? We would like to ask a few questions. Does it make sense that this poorly managed junkyard, which operated from approximately 1962 to 1989, has no contamination? Do you believe it just disappeared? What about why contaminants often found in junkyards are present in frogs' samples? Can anyone answer those questions? Respectfully, these are questions each of the board members should be asking the town consultants. In documents presented to the town consultants, the applicant and the consultants said that the operations began in 1971, but in reviewing the town minutes, it began in 1962. These prior board minutes are important and identified many concerns with the site, seemingly not considered in the review or this record. The minutes have discussions on contamination, DEC enforcement, crushing of vehicles, which would leak liquids, deposit lead and metals in our soil, and other hazardous materials. Issues with general upkeep, such as the infamous tires, which were even in the thousands, at that time. Mentions of oil entering a stream, unsecured fencing, which led to illegal dumping of all kinds of debris. Also, based on the town minutes, the operator did not have the funds to pay the disposal fees for the tires or fix the perimeter fencing. Do you think he paid to properly dispose of liquids and other harmful materials? Of course not. Now, as far as soil and groundwater testing at the end of January, I have questions, concerns, and points to raise. An unbiased and transparent board would have welcomed and encouraged Frogs' input and offered to be present during the testing, as they kindly offered to do. Their expertise is valuable, and a reasoned, well-meaning board would have engaged, permitted access, and incorporated their concerns into the continued review. In regard to the scope of testing locations, which appear to be largely chosen, influenced, or directed by the applicant based on the November 1st, 2023 submission, causes concern. Several locations appear to be the same or very close to where Transco previously tested. The entire northwest wedge and entire southern portion of the site still have not been tested. And again, based on historical areals, the western side of the site, which there were very few samples taken, has not been completely tested. Additionally, the southern portion of the site behind the building is potentially one of the most environmentally sensitive portions of the site.
Mr. Quimby,
Okay, I'll
are you
wrap
about to
up.
wrap it up?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Its proximity to the Great Swamp, steep slope to the upper fingers of the wetland, likely this is where much of the dismantling, wrecking, and crushing of vehicles occurred. At the end of October 2023, the applicant removed truckload after truckload of soil and covered it with fill and gravel that reaches depths of several feet. Why? Excavation of debris, potentially underground storage tanks, also occurred as evidence in the photos that I will submit to this board. I'll cut it short, but I have several pages of things I'd like you all to review.
Please submit it all. Thank you.
I just have one closing sentence. As we have maintained from the beginning, this should be classified as a type 1 action requiring a full EIS. And I'd like to thank the board for their time and consideration this evening, and I hope each of you will consider the comments here this evening, realizing the significant need for further study, evaluation, and urge you to not make the same mistakes again.
All right, thank you. Quimby? To address
So
anything
I do
there?
just want to address one item about how often this item has been on the agenda. And I want the public to understand that it was intentionally placed on the agenda each and every time a discussion was needed so that there would be full transparency because there were so many members of the public that were interested. In no way was it an effort to move this along any faster or any slower. It was in fact a way to keep everyone apprised of what was going on.
Yes, we hired consultants, public thing. We created the scope, public meeting. They did the testing, public meeting. The results of the testing, public meeting. I mean, that's an open process that I would hope everyone would appreciate. So, I don't know if anything else needs to be addressed there. Next, we have Jill Fieldstein.
Well, hold on. Actually, if we have a minute,
Sure.
I would like the consultants to explain portions of the property. The test sites were focused in certain areas and not focused on other areas. And what is the reason for that? What is the explanation?
I can give a specific example. In the northwest portion of the site, we had a test pit that we identified to be excavated there. But that's a portion where there's exposed bedrock. And so you go to dig into the soil and you go nowhere because the shovel is just banging on rock and there's no soil to put in a jar. And so in areas where we have exposed bedrock, if we had a test pit that was proposed to be placed there, we then moved it to a location where we could excavate it. And then so that's one of the reasons why we added 2 samples at the end, or 2 test pits, I should say.
Because you were in the field and you saw the conditions and...
You're in the field, you see the conditions, and then as you do the test pits, the site is directing where we can go at times. And so we added some test pits to make sure we had proper coverage. Because after they got moved around, it's like, oh, that we need to go over here or go over there.
What about portions of the site that aren't being disturbed?
I know that we extended beyond the limits of disturbance. One specific reason that comes to mind is, first of all, we were driven by the historical photographs of where cars were stored. That was the main reason why we picked certain locations. But another instance is, as we walked the whole site, we got to a point where you see we're looking for unusual formations, so we just had more of a mounding area that didn't seem quite natural. And so outside of the disturbance area, might have been right along the eastern side, but like we don't care where the disturbance area is, we're going to dig one right in there.
Okay.
And that was selected. So that was one of the reasons.
We also had a couple of spots where we, based on topographic maps and the site walk that was conducted, where there was discharge points to the south towards the Great Swamp, and those were not within the limits of disturbance, so we still decided to sample in those locations too.
Yeah, outside of the limits, we wanted physical features that might indicate something, and also discharge points going off-site.
So the focus was disturbed areas, but you went outside in cases where you thought it might lead to potential pollution of the neighboring property.
Correct. And there are also limiting factors on site. Steep elevation grades where you wouldn't want to take sampling machinery out onto it, whether it's due to tree density or change of elevation, just for site safety.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
And I will point out, we did have a full discussion about the sampling locations at a public meeting before the sampling was undertaken.
Thank you. Okay, next we have Jill Fieldstein. Come to the podium. You have 3 minutes.
Good evening. As you said, Jill Fieldstein, Dover Plains. Attorney Polidoro, I just want to comment on what you just said and appreciate that you did have all these discussions in open meetings with the public. However, as indicated, there was no opportunity for the public to be involved or to comment, or nor did the board take up Mr. Sullivan's offer to review and observe the testing. So while we appreciate the open hearing, it would have been nice to have some ability to comment on the scope of work. I want to focus on two areas where I haven't heard much about, and that the first most important is the fact that there was testing on the Frogs property that indicated there were contaminants in the vernal pools that may or may be impacting the habitat in that area. Excuse me. I have not heard anything about or any interest in where did those contaminants come from. And as the court said in its August 28th decision, the notion of dismissing the Frogs' findings, quote, out of hand, does not amount to the taking of a hard look at these environmental concerns. Yet here we are again with the consultants advising the board to once again dismiss the Frogs' testing results out of hand. I urge the planning board to consider these issues. Look at the reason, why aren't we trying to investigate the issues that Frogs raised as early as 2021 when it had its first meeting with Transco? The other issue that I'm not, well, people have mentioned, but I'd like to talk about more, is the southern end of the property, which was not tested at all. And that is an area where we believe there was a significant amount of automotive junkyard activity, potentially the site of the chop shop, potentially the site of a buried gas tank. As Charlie mentioned, in October, Transco started building a parking lot in that area, removing very much dirt and who knows what else that they were digging up from that site. And we brought it to the attention of the town. There was no permit. There was no oversight of the removal of potentially hazardous materials, which the consultants talked about would happen when they're taking materials off the property. So what happened in that area, and why is it not tested? Is there hazardous materials buried now under the parking lot, or was it all removed? These are questions I think the planning board really needs to get to the bottom of. And I just want to conclude by urging the planning board to please do your due diligence, ask hard questions before determining whether to issue a positive or negative declaration. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you address the southern?
So unbelievably rude.
Attorney Polidoro, anything you wanted to address there?
I was just asking, again, that the geologist consultants address the southern portion of the property, and it's now been raised twice.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, right now, that existing building's not going anywhere. It's part of the site plan. It's going to be the office for Transco. I think they're using it now as an office. Site plan didn't show an area of disturbance that was requiring excavation that would warrant an issue of investigating subsurface conditions there. So I think that's why it was excluded. Simple as that. I can't speak to the work that was done in October. I know Joe probably has been out there inspecting the site more than I have, but I don't know if you want to comment on any of that work and what they did.
I can speak on that. Don Anderson and I went out there during the construction of the parking lot. It was under the half an acre, under the 200-yard threshold. Thus, no permit was needed. They were basically constructing a parking lot from what our observations were.
Okay.
But it was looked into by both the town building inspector, who asked me to join him out there.
Okay. All right.
That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. All right, next we have Alyssa Leone. And for yourself and anybody, if I mispronounce your name, please do correct me.
It's Leone, like Mama's, but I cook better.
Okay.
We needed a little levity. Alyssa Leone, I live in Dover Plains. I've lived here 5 years, been a homeowner for the last 3. I really don't have the kind of detail that everyone else has spoken about this evening. However, I would like to say that given the kids are off on vacation for Easter, that a lot of families were not in town. And I would urge the board to please extend the hearing process so that more people can chime in about how they feel, pro or con. I think that that's a fair observation and an opportunity to really be more transparent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so the planning board will make a determination as to what to do next when we've heard from all members of the public during this public hearing this evening. There is no one else on the list. Anyone else who would like to speak at this public hearing, please come to the podium at this time.
I'd like to say something.
Please do, thank you. Just if you could just state your name so I can write it down. Thank you. And you'll have 3 minutes.
Hi, I'm Astrid Teal. I'm a member of Friends of the Great Swamp. My concern is, I know that you did the residential testing and everything like that. My concern is, what about the animals? Like the levels for the animals as far as amphibian reproduction, turtle reproduction, and things like that. Has that been taken into consideration with any of the testing, being that the neighboring property is a preserve? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And if you could just spell your name, please.
Oh, sorry. It's A as in Adam, S as in Sam, T as in Travis, R as in Ralph, I as in Ivan.
Okay.
My last name is Teal, like the color.
Teal. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. Planner Werner?
I can address it, or we can, I think we plan to respond between now and the next meeting in writing on some of this stuff. But, our scope was looking at again, like Brian has been mentioning, going by what the state would do for a site in a program, looking at the SCO that's appropriate, and we looked at the residential in this case. The issue of habitat was something that was dealt with, or animal habitat species was dealt with in the previous seeker process. I believe the court mentioned that the issues of wildlife there was a hard look taken there. So again, the focus here was human health, and is there a release on site? Is there a release that's moving off site, and how do we address it?
Okay, so let me go through this again. So the hard look at contamination includes, but is not limited to, the following impacts: 3, impacts on surface water from contamination; 4, impacts to groundwater from contamination; 7, impacts on plants and animals from contamination; 12, impacts on critical environmental areas, the Great Swamp, from contamination; 16, impacts on human health from contamination. So while the court did bring up impacts on plants and animals from contamination, what our study showed is that there is no contamination, so therefore there's no impact.
That's accurate. And, as part of the investigation, there was no observance of any, stressed vegetation or other conditions that would warrant a concern for wildlife or plants.
Great. Thank you. All right. Anyone else like to speak at this public hearing? Please come to the podium at this time.
You're not gonna like it. You ready? This is the only reason is.
Always welcome public input.
My name is Veronica Dobrovolsky. That's the only part that you won't like.
Oh, okay. If you could spell that, please.
Okay.
And then you can start it through.
D-O-B.
D-O-B.
R-O-W.
R-O-W.
O-L-S-K-I.
O-L-S-K-I?
O-L-S-K-I.
Okay.
I live on Cricket Hill Road.
And you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Swamp and Transco. 3 things. First of all, when the gentleman from Transco came to my house and said, it's cool, I said, well, what do the frogs think? And he said, the frogs are all with it. So I signed the petition. So I was a little disappointed in that. Second thing is you said that you're going to be removing any kind of contaminated dirt and it'll go on its process on the way it's supposed to go. Now, after you remove that dirt, that topsoil, I mean, not for nothing, I could put topsoil on top. Maybe it's 50 feet for you guys, but for me, 5 feet, and then I'll check the dirt and it's fine because I put topsoil on it. Are you going to test after you take the topsoil off? That's, like do a couple more diggings and say, oh, okay, we're still good. And the third thing is the animals are having a little bit of a problem. I have a lot more bears in my backyard. I have a lot more deer in my backyard, a lot more turkeys, and a lot more dog barking because I have a dog who loves animals. So I think that maybe there is an environmental animal problem with having this big trees and stuff like that being taken away from our animals. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Warner, anything you want to address there?
Can't speak to the comment about the applicant's outreach, but regarding the excavation, my understanding is they're going down to bedrock for the full excavation of the project, which will remove all the soil even the soil that we tested. And they are going to prepare a soil management plan at our request. It was a conclusion in our report, which will document how that's going to be handled, where it's going to go off-site. As far as what they're putting in for fill and, putting in the new substation infrastructure, I believe a lot of that is gravel. And any fill that's brought in, I can't speak to that, but I'm sure that it's certified clean. Usually that's the case.
Engineer Berger.
Yeah, we'll have tickets. That'll be part of the standard process the town does for fill being brought in. All fill will be brought in with tickets, inspected and certified by their engineer and verified by myself or building.
Okay. Thank you. Further? Okay. All right, any other members of the public wish to speak at this public hearing, please come to the podium at this time.
Name is Mark Burkhart. B-U-R-K-H-A-R-T. I've been 40 years living in this town. I don't know how much longer. I guess my question is, what do we do if we get where we are now to the point where I would say the overwhelming majority of folks in this town have had enough of these power projects? It seems to be a dance we go through with all this stuff. If we can inflict enough pain on the applicant environmentally, then maybe they go away. Most times they don't because they have money to pay. I'm not going to argue the science. I don't know what's in the ground. I don't know what is it. Let people decide that. I'm only saying that, from people I talk to in the town, from the number of people I know that signed the petition, there's 1,000 people that say they don't want this. And this looks to me like it's going the same direction as everything else in this town. It's just going to get approved. We're going to be dealing with it forever. This big monstrosity is going to be up there again. And it feels profoundly frustrating not to be able to change the direction of your town when all these people are giving so much input. And, nobody seems to listen. You listen, but I don't know if you hear. And I don't know if there's anything you can do about it because you'll tell me, well, they're approved to do that on this property. Well, then there's a problem with how that was zoned. If the overwhelming majority of people don't want it, we're still going to get it, we're stuck again. So I'm not, and again, I'm not here to argue the science. I don't know what's there, I don't know what's not, but I'm just here for a practical matter. I'm tired of all these power projects, really. It's killing the town. I don't know whether you all see that or talk to people in town, but you should. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark. So, I could speak to that as a former town supervisor. The town board determines the zoning for the town. The planning board, as a group, administers the zoning. So, if you don't like any part of the town zoning or any other part of the local law, you need to talk with the town board about looking to change that. So, Attorney Polidoro, you want to?
I mean, I guess I would just add that land use approvals are not a popularity contest. You know, these board members, it doesn't matter if they like a project or they don't like a project. They are tasked with reviewing the project against the appropriate state law and against the town zoning law. And so they have to work within the confines of that. And so, you know, this board members may feel as frustrated as you do, but they're doing their job by reviewing it against state law and the zoning law.
Thank you. All right. Any other members of the public wishing to speak at this public hearing, please come to the podium at this time. Okay. Seeing no one approaching the podium, the planning board has three options. We can continue this public hearing, we can close this public hearing, we can close this public hearing and allow for written comments until some particular date. So, who'd like to?
I'd like to continue the public hearing.
I agree. Continue, okay. Continue. Any other thoughts? Okay. All right, so our next meeting is April 15th. I'll make a motion to continue the public hearing to Monday, April 15th at 7 p.m. or as soon thereafter as the planning board can hear comments from the public.
So moved.
I move that, seconded by
Member Williams.
Member Williams, thank you. All right, discussion?
No discussion. Discussion.
Okay. Seeing no discussion, all those in favor of the motion put forward with continuing public hearing would say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed would say no. Okay, that motion passes 6-0 with one absence. All right. That is it for this public hearing, which has now been continued to the next meeting. Our next scheduled meeting is April 15th at here at Town Hall. The deadline for that has passed. We did receive one application. Okay. What I would ask, just given this project and everything, normally we would have a public hearing at the very beginning, but I would think with this being a new project, we'd at least give them the time at the very beginning of the meeting to state what they're looking to do and start the process for them, and then they can be on their way, and then we'll go to the public hearing. Without any objection, that is how we'll have the agenda set up. Okay. All right, and then we do have a meeting on May 6th, the deadline for which is April 17th. Okay, is there any other business before this planning board?
I'd just like to make a comment. I appreciate all the input from the public at this board and any other, for this board, I should say, and all my questions were answered by council and our consultants. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right. Any other further business before this planning board? Okay, I'll need a motion to adjourn.
Excuse me? Will we be able to speak again on the 15th or no?
You can speak again on the 15th. Yes, you'll
Absolutely.
have 3 minutes.
I know it's public hearing, but I didn't know if...
You can get up and speak again for another 3 minutes if you'd like. Okay. And now I know how to spell your name, miss. All right. Motion to adjourn made by Member Sador, seconded by Member Villano. All those in favor of adjournment say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We're adjourned.